The mansion had always loomed over the town, a shadowy presence that seemed to seep into the bones of anyone who dared to approach. Its walls were tall and imposing, made of gray stone that seemed to drink in the sunlight rather than reflect it. The windows were high and narrow, set deep in their frames, and the front door was a massive slab of oak that looked like it could withstand a battering ram. For as long as anyone could remember, the mansion had been abandoned. Some said it was cursed, haunted by the spirits of its former occupants. Others whispered that it was simply too large and too expensive for anyone to maintain. But everyone agreed on one thing: the mansion was not to be trifled with. Despite the warnings, there were always a few brave souls who couldn't resist the lure of the mansion. They would sneak onto the grounds, peering through the windows or trying the door to see if it was unlocked. But none of them ever stayed for long, chased off by the eerie silence that seemed to permeate the place. And then, one day, a family moved into the mansion. It happened so suddenly that the townspeople were taken aback. No one had seen any moving trucks. No one had heard any rumors. But suddenly there they were. A mother, a father, and 2 children, living in the mansion as though it were a perfectly ordinary home. At first, the townspeople were skeptical. Surely the family would soon discover the horrors that lurked within the mansion's walls and flee in terror. But as the weeks turned into months, it became clear that the family was there to stay. They were an odd family, to be sure. The mother rarely left the house, and when she did, it was always after dark, her face obscured by a thick veil. The father was a tall, thin man with a long, pointed nose and a voice that grated on the nerves. And the children, well, the children were never seen at all. The townspeople couldn't help but wonder what was going on inside the mansion. Were the children being kept prisoner? Was the family involved in some kind of dark magic? No one dared to ask, though. The mansion still had the power to inspire fear, even with the family living there. But as the months wore on, strange things began to happen in the town. Animals would disappear, leaving behind nothing but bloodstains. People reported seeing shadows moving in the corners of their eyes, and strange noises echoed through the streets at night. It was as though the town itself was under a curse. One day, a young girl went missing. She had been playing in the woods behind the mansion, and when her mother went to call her in for dinner, she was nowhere to be found. The townspeople searched the woods for hours, but there was no sign of the girl. That night, a scream tore through the town. It was a sound that chilled the blood, a sound that seemed to come from the very depths of the earth. The townspeople ran to the mansion, their hearts pounding with fear, and pounded on the door. No one answered. They broke the door down, flooding into the mansion like a tide. They searched every room, calling out the girl's name, but there was no sign of her. As they were about to give up hope, they heard a sound coming from the basement. It was a sound like nothing any of them had ever heard before. It was a sound that seemed to come from the very depths of the earth, a sound that was both chilling and hypnotic. The townspeople descended the stairs to the basement, their flashlights casting flickering shadows on the stone walls. The sound grew louder and more intense as they approached, and soon they found themselves standing before a heavy metal door. The door was locked, but one of the men produced a crowbar and began to pry it open. The sound coming from behind the door was so intense now that the townspeople could feel it in their bones, a low rumbling that seemed to shake the very foundations of the mansion. With a final grunt, the man wrenched the door open, and the townspeople peered inside. What they saw made their blood run cold. The basement was filled with a strange, swirling mist, and in the center of the room stood a figure. It was the mother from the mansion, but she was no longer wearing her veil. Instead, her face was twisted into a rictus of agony, and her eyes were rolled back into her head. In her arms, she cradled the missing girl. The child was unconscious, her face pale and her limbs limp. But even as they watched, the mother began to rock back and forth, her voice rising in a strange, guttural chant. The townspeople backed away in terror, but they were trapped. The door had swung shut behind them, and now it refused to budge. They were locked in the basement with the chanting mother and the unconscious child, and there seemed to be no escape. And then, something changed. The mist began to swirl faster, and the chanting grew louder. The mother's eyes snapped open, and she fixed her gaze on the townspeople. Her lips twisted into a snarl, and she spoke a single word. Mine. And then the mist swallowed them whole. When the mist cleared, the townspeople found themselves standing in the center of the town square. The mansion loomed in the distance, but it was no longer the imposing, ominous structure it had once been. Instead, it was crumbling and decrepit, the walls covered in vines and the windows shattered. The family was nowhere to be seen. No one ever found out what had happened in the basement of the mansion that night, or where the family had gone. But the town was never the same again. The animals stopped disappearing, the shadows stopped moving, and the strange noises stopped echoing through the streets. But the townspeople could never shake the feeling that something had been unleashed that night, something that could never be put back in its box. The mansion stood as a silent witness to their fear, a reminder that sometimes the most terrifying things are the ones we can't explain.